Right, everybody. Hello. It's Wednesday, 11th of May, 2016, and today's webinar is on the engineer component, which is one of the more interesting ones. Particularly, yours truly has it as a dominant component in his own personality. Today, what we're going to discuss is an introduction, talk about the characteristics of the engineer, then move on to top dog, how we recognize the people and the sort of cars they like to drive and what their favorite colors are. Then we'll talk about how to handle an engineer, social skills, objections, and gaining commitment. Then personality dissonance and the engineer, which are the components under the the 7 Humm components of the engineer find the most difficult to relate to. And then we'll finish up with engineer combinations, the normal engineer, the hustler engineer, mover engineer, double checker engineer, the artist engineer, and the politician engineer. So take about 30 to 35 minutes, I hope, and away we go. This is a summary of the engineer in probably the best slide I've ever seen. The engineer is given a message to put the pie in the oven at 140 degrees. He goes and gets a protractor, puts it at an angle, and puts it in. I just think it's such a great slide because it sums up the characteristics of an engineer perfectly. They take things slightly, but follow through and do it in sort of a high level of detail. So I just think that sort of sums it up. So the next time you're looking at an engineer, you can ask yourself, would he put the pie in the oven at 140 degrees? It's a fantastic slide. It just sums it up, right? Engineers are driven by the desire to complete projects. That's their big overriding desire. And they are particularly high, if we take the 5-factor theory, high in conscientiousness. High E's are detailed-minded, organized, objective planners, very, very good on follow-through. People with low engineer components tend to jump in, don't have follow-through, are slipshod, erratic, subjective, all right, and they don't tend to have personal involvement in a project. That's really the way they work. As I said, we have the Humm-Wadsworth model, has 70 Q components. The engineer was originally based, when the original theory came out, on epilepsy. And people were called epileptoids. But now what happened was, the more I did the research, I realized, in fact, that if there was a sort of psychiatric illness that related to the engineer, it was basically the obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD. And this cartoon is wonderful to read. It says, these pills will cure your OCD, but first I want you to organize my shelves. And of course, someone with OCD is very, very good at organizing shelves and doing this. And anyway, it's an excellent cartoon, sums it up perfectly. And as I said, it's not epilepsy, but the obsessive compulsive disorder. That's the sort of people, the 1 or 2% who have, excess, but this excessive mental illness. But we're dealing with people, of course, who are less of that, and they handle it quite well. Right. Engineer subcomponents, as I've said, Shannon McLeod has basically analyzed the engineer and come up with the following components. I like this cartoon. I have CDO. It's like OCD, but the letters in alphabetical order, as they should be, right? And these are the sort of characteristics. Epileptoid A, this is one of the subfactors, is project mindedness and attention to detail. Epileptoid B is organization. Epileptoid C is how much you're detached and objective. And then finally, epileptoid D is the degree of egoism, because engineers get really involved in their projects. That's the big thing that they do, and they do it to the exclusion of anything else. So, as I said, and they like to have it orderly, right? Just summing up the characteristics of them, this is a great cartoon of one. His office, it's got the whiteboard at the back with a project plan on it being ticked off. books, they love to read. He's got the pens in the pocket, very much classic engineer. They're detail-minded, and they're perfectionists, okay? They're very much what I call hands-on operators. They're kinesthetic is the phrase. They're not verbal or visual, but they want to touch things, right? And they like getting their hands dirty and sort of working with prototypes. To an engineer, process is everything. That's the magic word with an engineer when you're talking to them is what is the process, how we're going to do this, what's the plan, right? They tend to be poor at delegation. They work extremely hard, but that's one of their weaknesses, delegating to other people. And that's a skill that they have to learn. As I said, one of the other characteristics of an engineer is they're very, very practical, objective. They can work alone and they work very hard. Here we have a sort of research scientist, and I know someone very well, and this is not only is she very practical and objective, works with dedicated enthusiasm, she looks like this person. So this is just quite amazing. They're very, very, as I said, painstaking planners and organizers. And this person, for example, was a blood scientist, ended up putting in, during the AIDS scare, sort of 6 blood test national, so statewide blood testing clinics. Got the project completed. It was a $30 million project, got it done on time and within budget. They're pretty uncompromising with their attitudes. So once they believe in something, they do it. And they tend to be slightly detached from the outside world. This is another characteristic, because they're so involved in their own project. So, pardon me, that's one of their outstanding characteristics. They're very, very good at follow through. They end up tending to be over proud of completed projects. They fully invest their ego in a project, right? Tend to be compulsive readers. And again, this is another good cartoon. As you can see, this is the full range of manuals behind them, the whiteboard on the wall. They're technology addicts. They tend to be sort of follow up on the latest addict. So, I mean, it used to be one of the giveaways. I used to say that they'd have the Bluetooth earpiece in their phone, right? They're now basically probably into virtual reality. There's the new mask that you see coming out. They were the first persons to build their own website. They were the first person to have a PC on their desk, right? They tend to be monomaniac talkers. They get involved in their project and they really follow through on it. And that's all they want to talk about. Peter Farrell, for example, who was the founder of ResMed, which is, if you don't know it, it's a company that produces machines that help you reduce your sleep apnea. And it was amazing. Anytime you talk to Peter, no matter what the subject was, within 5 minutes, the conversation would revolve around the sleep apnea. That's the way Peter Farrell, and he was a fantastic entrepreneur. And I regard having the engineer as a very important component of being a successful entrepreneur. The other thing they tend to do is enjoy a drink. And here's the morning afterwards, and there's the engineer sticking some Alka-Seltzer in a glass. That's and engineers are notorious, of course, at universities for being perhaps the people who enjoy a drink most. Don't need a lunch, but they do enjoy a drink. Here's another picture of an engineer. This is Thomas Edison. Here it comes. I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work. So in terms of what they do, their talk is monotonic. Organization, they like working in builders and developers. They tend to work as consultants. As I said, they're not good at managing and delegating. They're good at project management. Dress, giveaway, as I say, is the pens in the pocket. Green is their color, as we'll see later on. It tends to be slightly discordant. They'll have a vertically striped shirt with a horizontally striped tie, and the colors sometimes don't quite mix and match. The phrase blue and green should never be seen without a color in between. Well, that's a bit of an engineer. Office is generally a big giveaway. There's a whiteboard there, a project plan on the wall, very full bookshelves. They love reading about a project. Yeah, but they tend to be on time and they're friendly, but they're really task-oriented people. They're not people-oriented. And punctuality is sometimes an issue, because what can happen is they get very involved in the project and sort of lose grasp of time. But as I say, on the other hand, time is very important to an engineer, and you don't want to be late for a meeting with them. And they'll be friendly. I mean, it won't be sort of effusively friendly or such, but they will be friendly. So that's the top dog. Oops, back one. Sorry, there we are. Cars, well, it has to be a Tesla now. I used to say, engineers was the green Jaguar, but the Tesla now is becoming, just alluded to me that over a meal about 2 weeks ago, I was sitting down with someone who was obviously a high engineer from this conversation and the way he was talking. And suddenly we had a conversation revolved around cars, and then he mentioned that he had a Tesla. He bought one. Well, the next 20 minutes, that's all he talked about. That completely dominated the conversation. What a fantastic car it was to drive, what you could do with it, engineering, how you charged it. It was, so the Tesla is the sort of, is the new mark of an engineer. And of course, as I've said earlier, green is their color. And of course, it's because it has to be a green Tesla. And one of the reasons I regard the green movement itself as being very successful is it, in fact, normally revolutionary movements are the artists because they beat to a different drum. But the engineer came in and sort of took over the green movement. Makepeace, for example, Brian Makepeace is a scientist, comes across engineering. He's written various pieces, and so he was very, very much a sort of engineer. And in terms of organization, setting out a project, getting it organized, researching it, etc., is that again very much the engineer personality. And I think that's a big reason the Greens have been successful in the sense, not all of them, of course, but the people sort of running it, is that they're project minded. They have very firm objectives. They see it as a project, and they've done it successfully. Social skills. Well, what do you need to do when you're dealing with an engineer? Well, the first thing is pre-arrange the meetings. If they're working on something else, let them work on it because they're involved in that project. Once they've finished it, and find out when if they're working on a project which is taking a lot of their time, find out when it becomes less. Wallow in the detail, right? They love to discuss it, and give them many brochures and manuals as you can. I always remember the first time I sold to an engineer, I had to bring in, I met him. He was classic. He was Electricity Commission of New South Wales. They had put him in as the IT manager. He didn't know anything about IT. He was a project manager and had done some successful setting up power stations and work on it. And the managing director of the Electricity Commission brought him in and said, Neville, I want you to fix our computer department. It's a disaster. So that was his project. Anyway, we got sort of talking away, and the first time I met him, and I mean, he had the pens in the pocket, projects on the wall, spoke in a monotonic fashion, waxed on about the projects. I said, this guy is walked out and said he's a classic E. And I looked at the sales guy that we'd been given at the time and said, give him brochures. So the next day we met, which was about 3 or 4 days later, I said, look, I'm going to recommend that you use the George 3 operating system. It's a very sophisticated operating system. Hardware is unimportant. I've been a system engineer for IBM. It's software, which is a clue. And I've got this introductory manual. Would you like to read it? And I've never forgotten when he reached across to grab it. It's like I'd given him sort of, a bar of gold. It was fantastic the way he held it. And the next morning I rang him up and said, a couple of days later, had a chance to read the manual, and he said, I was up all last night reading it. It's absolutely fascinating. And I said, well, would you like another manual? And he said, have you got more? And I ended up giving him, right, over the time, 7 manuals, and he read the lot, and he had his staff reading it as well. I mean, it was just, they just wanted it. Right? The other thing they want to do is test drive the product. They'd like to get their hands on it. It's very, very important. And in this case, what happened, they had a benchmark, and we had George 3 installed at another site. It was, in fact, at Woolworths. And they said, we've got this benchmark, and this is what we want to do. And I said, well, you can do it. They said, what do you mean? I said, well, you run it. We'll set it up. You can run it at Woolworths. And And it was basically a big sort, etc. And there were several reasons why. But anyway, to cut a long story short, the three of them, Neville and his two sidekicks, went in. I sent along a system analyst with them, and they went in. And I said, "You go in at 5 o'clock. It's a multi-framework system, but they've agreed that you can go in and then do your project." Anyway, the next morning, I rang his office to see if he was in and how it went, and they said, "Well, he isn't in." I thought, that's funny. And then I noticed the system analyst, Steve, wasn't around. I thought, oh. So I rang up Woolworths, the computer department, and said, did they come in last night? And back came the person. They said, oh, they're still here. I said, what? So they've been working all night, right? I said, what do you mean they're still there? I said, put Neville on the phone. So I said to Neville, what are you doing? He said, Chris, we've got the benchmark down to 10 minutes and 23 seconds, but we think we can take another minute of it. Do you mind if we stay here and keep working on it? And I said, Neville, it's up to Woolworths. If you're not distracting you. Oh, no, we're getting along brilliant with them. They're really interested in what we've been doing. A couple of ideas that could speed up their computer processing as well. And I said, that's fantastic. No, you stay there and happy. Well, are they going to buy the product? It was the only account that IBM lost to ICL in the whole of the world that year. And as I said, they were really onto it. So that just gives you a classic example of the engineer. And you've got to set everything up as a plan, a task, and a project timetable. And be very clear and factual. Don't be emotional. Just say, this is the way it works. This is the process. This is how it operates. The other thing they like is feeling words, like hot, cold, touch. Okay, they don't, politicians like basic, verbal words, okay, and artists like visual words, but they like words that they can touch, feeling words that you can feel things. So that's other things to use. Do you feel warm about this idea? Does it touch you, etc. It's words like that, right? Engineer objections. The classically 3 objections. First of all, they won't make a decision now. That's because they're involved in another project and they want to go into the detail. Until they've done it, they won't make a decision. Second is your proposition isn't good enough. As I've said, they will go into your proposition with big detail. And if they don't think it's good enough and it's not good enough, you won't get the order. You won't convince them, right? The last thing is bad past experience with your company. If you failed them in something like support, it's really tough to sort of get to the next sort of level. They remember that they've got sort of, their memory, their minds are like, brains are like steel traps, and they'll remember it. So that's the 3 objections you've got. So you've really got to work on your proposition. No, it's going to take a lot of detail. The thing is that most people know that they spend a lot of detail, and they become excellent reference cells post the, if you are successful with them. So that's the thing. But that's the 3 classic objections. So just remember, it's going to be a long, intense sale. But if you can get them getting their hands on the project and hit them with the manuals, it works. Trust me. Right. Physical action. Right. What they do, the commitment action, is again, as I said, they want to touch it. This is a great one. You can use computers to model out an investment strategy. Well, here you are. Let's work out your most efficient investment strategy by working on this computer spreadsheet model together. This is a classic way of doing it, setting up a computer model, setting up a spreadsheet, working it out together. And that's what they love doing. And it's all because they love Excel spreadsheets. Okay, working with spreadsheets, etc. Engineers working out the model, and that's what they can do well. So it's the physical action. It's also known as the puppy dog close, right? You let them, you put it, give them like a puppy dog to play with, and then they fall in love with it, etc. Right? But it's the physical action which is important. Managerial styles. I've used Kevin Rudd because he was notorious as Prime Minister, terrible delegator. There's this great quote at the bottom. Kevin Rudd does not believe in a proposal as any good until he's personally approved it. And this is Annabel Crabb, who is one of Australia's leading political writers, and she's on television, and she's very astute on some of her comments. And this is just classical sort of Kevin Rudd sort of statement. Supposedly when he was replaced by Julia Gillard and they went into his office, there was something like 150 consultants reports on various projects that he had sort of asked for. And so and this is classically what they do. They tend to be good project managers if you give them one project, but they aren't good at multitasking. So that's the difficulty with these. And of course, in a job like Prime Minister, multitasking is the name of the game. And so, but if you put them in with one project and just say, that's what we want to get done, they are pretty good at doing it. Of course, he was very, very good at maneuvering himself back into becoming a prime minister. That became his project, his raison d'etre. And he did it well. He got himself remade after being thrown out, everyone realized how bad it was. He got himself back in as prime minister. But of course, that was it. They're not good with people in the sense they're poor delegators. They tend to be methodical decision makers if they haven't got too many, and this is, of course, a Rudd's thing. Then one of the weaknesses, they tend to wallow in the detail. And that's a big issue with these, that they tend to wallow in the detail. They don't simply make a decision and go on. They also tend to be control freaks. This is the way you've got to do it. And they micromanage. And though that can be important in a project, and they work like dogs. I mean, they'll be there, 20 hours out of 24. But on the other hand, that can be bad, and not everyone can work like that. So that's the way that these are. Personality dissonance. Well, this is the things that they do. They come across. They suffer from feature diarrhea. They talk excessively about a subject and keep going on. They tend to overkill you with information, which can confuse you. They don't get to the punchline early enough. They keep waxing and talking on. Instead of saying, these are the advantages. They take too long when they're in a discussion. They waste people's time. And they don't notice feelings because they're not people, they're tasks. So when there's signs of worry, anxiety, they don't pick it up. So that's the sort of injuries. The two people really they have a problem with are hustlers and movers. Okay, hustlers, for example, they want to talk money. They want the discount. Let's get into it. Movers, again, like to talk about the big picture. They don't like excessive detail. And this can drive the engineer focusing on the detail, going through it absolutely point by point, talking a process. The mover just wants the job done and they get it done quickly, right? And talk people, and they want to socialize. And of course, this is what the engineer wants to talk about the problem, the project, the process in excessive detail, which of course the mover gets bored with. Again, the hustler, they want to get, we're wasting time. I could be making money in other areas. That's what I want to do. So that's the two groups. So engineers find it difficult to work with movers, with hustlers. And of course, a lot of decision makers have a lot of H in them, and a lot of decision makers have a lot of M in them. And this is why E's find it difficult when they're selling. Going through the components, right. The first one is the normal engineer. These people can be extremely obsessive. And Marie Curie, of course, is one of the most famous scientists in the world. She was the discoverer of radium, polonium. She won 2 Nobel Prizes, one for physics in 1905. This is only 5 years after they started getting awarded, and then the Nobel Chemistry Prize in 1911. And of course, she ultimately died of radiation poisoning because she was the one who gradually kept purifying, a radium mineral and effectively extracting radium. There tend to be experts, and they don't relate readily and easily to others. And as I said, and Madame Curie working on the discovery of radium, where she sort of kept distilling, mineral after mineral. This is a completely unambiguous project where they can work alone, and that's what she did. And also, once they've done the work, they dislike having to be the public presenter afterwards. And another example, I could sort of now thinking about it, would be someone like Wozniak. He's a high engineer, the guy who was the founder of Apple. He did not like publicly presenting, so he was absolutely focused on developing the computer. But it was Jobs who loved doing the public presenting and sort of getting out there and selling it. So, but normal engineers, this is the way they are. Curie is exactly the one. And as I said, they're very, very good at the process, doing the job, good workers. But as I say, right, Hustler engineers, well, I've used characters from the Big Bang Theory because the four of them are fantastic engineer types together. And Howard Wolowitz is the hustler. And what's interesting, there he is an engineer, as we know. I keep chipping him on that, about that he hasn't got a PhD. But there he is, and he's got his red shirt on and his red sort of pullover, and he's one. And as I said, they like project work that promises a substantial financial return. And Howard's quite astute. You know, he's objective of what's going on, analytical and calculating. I mean, you know, etc. They do look after their own interests, but they do have some charm and affability. That's because that's the age coming in, and moderating the E. And the combination of ambition and pragmatism and focus leads them to achieving financial goals. And for those of you who don't know it, I worked in venture capital for 25 years, and we used to site test our entrepreneurs. And one of the things we discovered that this, in fact, is the best profile for an entrepreneur. That they want to make money, but when they get involved with it, they see it as a project, and they hit the project hard with a lot of detail. And that's what you need when you're doing a startup. So funnily enough, it was the hustler engineers who were the best not what we expected. I should say we were looking for quite a different sort of individual before. And but when we couldn't get away from the facts that the companies that were giving us the best returns, the CEO was a hustler engineer. His CEO and founder was a hustler engineer. So this is the reason. But if you think about it, not so crazy. Hustlers want to make money, and that's what you want. If you're an investor, you want someone who's going to build wealth, right? And then secondly, the engineer sees it as a project, puts everything into the project of building up the business and then selling out. And they put it through with high detail, and they do focus, and everyone knows that they're looking at it, and they work very, very hard. So that's etc. So it's page 109 in the Humm handbook is the page numbers I'm going to. All right, mover engineer. Well, I just thought this T-shirt, I've used it before. You know, not everything's flat in Saskatchewan. With the mover engineer, there's a big conflict between the mover and the engineer. The engineer wants to sit on a single project, work very, very hard. The M wants to multitask and talk to lots of people. So there's a conflict between, and whether it gets resolved or not depends on the degree of normal. They do like to focus on one project, but will be distracted by new social interactions. They tend to be sort of skylarkers. As I said, this is see the funny sides of things. They're actually not bad instructors. They stick to they'll stick to a well-organized course, but have a friendly delivery style. They're good team leaders. They work incredibly hard. I mean, the mover has a lot of energy. The engineer has a lot of intensity is working. What can happen, of course, is you can have bursts of emotion. The movers basically can tend to be emotional, and then the engineers can have a burst of emotion when projects don't work. So that's etc. And if you've got a female move engineer, quite often if you're having a performance review, etc., make sure you have some tissues, because that's what that can happen during a performance interview. Next is the double checker engineer, and of course, Dr. Leonard Hofstadter is a perfect one of these. I mean, if you think about him, he is keen and conscientious, but suffers from self-doubt, irritability, and anxiety. He really needs structure and security, and of course, the on-off with Penny is a wonderful example of that. Can be seen by others as very pedantic, and that's what can happen with engineers. They're quick to find fault with themselves and with others, and they tend to be sort of formal, open communicators. And that's, of course, Leonard Hofstadter to a T. So he's a beautiful double checker engineer. And if you watch The Big Bang Theory, you'll see all, as I said, the engineers in action, but he's wonderful. Then we move on to the artist engineer, and of course, then we have another one, and that's Raj Kuthapalli. And he's a classic artist, the metrosexual research scientist. He's a quiet achiever. As you know, he can't talk to women unless he's had a drink, right? They strive for idealistic perfection. He's, the last one to get a girlfriend because he's looking for perfection. They're not team leaders, and he doesn't come across that in the group. Prefer to publish rather than present. And of course, what they do have is a tendency occasionally to speak or act inappropriately. And he does that. That's one of the jokes. Ongoing sort of memes in the Big Bang Theory. So if you're thinking of an artist engineer, probably the most introverted component of the introverted sort of personality type, temperament type, I mean, of all the components. And Rogers, of course, fills that. Then we move on finally to the politician engineer, and Sheldon, of course, is the archetype politician engineer. They need to own projects, and that's what he does. He's, tend to be incredibly tenacious when they're working on a project, hypersensitive to criticism, right? Rather aloof and even arrogant, and they work best as creative specialists. They prefer to work independently rather than a group, and that's of course Sheldon to a T, and that's one of the difficulties with politician engineers. And what they have to do, in fact, to succeed in a business career is normally develop the emotional intelligence skills to sort of analyze other people. But what I have found is that engineers actually, of all these 7 components, do actually like the Humm, because it's a systematic way of looking and analyzing people, and they like the process, they like the system, and that's what I think is so central. Right, so there we are. That's the engineer in action. Quite common, by the way, along with the mover, the most common component found in people. And of course, you can see it's quite a male characteristic. A lot of males have engineers in them. They want to do tasks and sort of jobs and retreat to their cave and do that. So that's very much the case. Right. In summary, all right, engineers are driven by the desire to complete projects. That's all you've got to remember. They work doing one project at a time, doing it thoroughly. The mental illness they're related to is the obsessive compulsive disorder. And that's all you think. So that sums it up. They're obsessive about projects and compulsively have to work on them. They're task rather than people orientated. They want to complete the task. And engineers, of course, are that way. They're objective, they're planners, they're readers. It's the temperament component found in most consultants. They tend to be technical innovators, and they follow on. So they're the ones who are driving the Teslas now. They're hands-on, they aren't verbal or visual. And if you want to get them committed, use a physical action close, and that's the puppy dog. Right, well, that wraps up the screen sharing, the presentation. Oops, there we are. Just enough. Goodbye, everyone. Hope you enjoyed all that. The next one component will be the hustler, which we will hopefully do at the beginning of June. There might be a slight gap because I have to go to the States for a week. But other than that, hope you enjoyed that, and look forward to that. Hoping you watch this and use the sort of methodologies and techniques and discussion things that I use in it as when you interact with engineers. I'll sign off for now. Goodbye.